Kevin Riley opened the door to his house, took off his shoes, and walked down the hallway to the kitchen. He had just driven his wife, Carrie, to the airport, where she was about to board an early morning flight to the state capital. It was her 2-week, 3-day trip to perform secretarial duties for her boss, Bradley Knox Roman III, or as Kevin always called him, Trey. Every time he used the nickname for her boss's legal name, Carrie reminded him that her boss hated him. Although he never admitted it to his wife, it was one of the reasons he always found a way to weave the nickname into conversation. She might think Bradley Knox Roman III was a great guy, but Kevin didn't really like him. There was something false about him. He looked at his watch and saw that it was only 7:30 a.m., which left him plenty of time to get to the workshop by 9, when it opened. It was time for another cup of coffee, and as he poured it, he realized that he also had time to check his email and maybe surf the internet a little. He wasn't a big fan of computers or the internet, but he found that email was a good way to keep in touch with some of the guys he went to vocational school with. There were 4 of them who stuck together as a group, learning the intricacies of diesel mechanics. The other 3 got jobs outside the city, and he was lucky enough to get a job with one of the large heavy equipment sales and service companies right in his hometown. At 30 years old, Kevin was one of 3 chief mechanics and had a team of 5 people working under his direction. Being the head of the group didn't mean he didn't have to work alongside them. He still got as dirty as they did, although he mostly worked on fuel systems. Kevin enjoyed his job, although it could mean unexpected overtime and sometimes the need for field work. At least he didn't have to travel as often as Carrie did with her job. Carrie had only been working at the law firm of Crosby and Knox for 6 months, landing the job a week after completing the advanced training required to move from a real estate secretary position to a better-paying legal secretary position. She and Kevin met in college while each was learning their trade. That was over 8 years ago, and they had been married for the last 6 years. When they got married, Kevin was just starting to work in a workshop, and Carrie was hired as a secretary at a local real estate agency. Because they both worked, they were able to put a down payment on the house they now lived in. They managed to move into their own home less than 2 years after they started their careers, which they were both proud of. With a cup of coffee in hand, Kevin headed down the hallway to the spare bedroom where their computer was installed. He hoped it was still on because he noticed Carrie using it for a few minutes after she got dressed and packed. At least he won't have to wait for it to boot if she left it on. As he entered the room, he saw the image they were using as their screensaver slowly moving across the screen in its random journey across the face of the monitor. "Damn, we make a great couple," he told the empty house as he watched their photo move in front of him. They were side by side on lounge chairs, surrounded only by white sand, with the blue of the Gulf of Mexico behind them. Both were beautifully tanned, smiling and wearing the skimpiest swimwear. It was one of many photos they took while on vacation in Cancun 18 months ago. They were both wearing sunglasses so you couldn't see his gray eyes or Carrie's blue eyes, but other than that there wasn't much that couldn't be seen. Carrie's shoulder-length blonde hair was lighter than his son, bleached light brown hair, and their tans were almost the same shade. Lying on the sun loungers, it was impossible to tell that she was 4 inches shorter than his 6-foot height. It's not the photo he wanted to use as a screensaver, but Carrie wouldn't let him use one of the photos taken when they spent the day at the resort's nude beach. She was afraid that her parents or someone else she didn't want to see in this photo would somehow come in and see it on the screen. In deference to her concerns, he left the photos in a secure folder hidden behind a password. Maybe, if he has time, he'll take a quick look through this folder before heading to work to pay homage to Carrie's luxurious 36C. On the other hand, considering that he would have to spend the next 2 nights alone in their bed, he decided that maybe it wasn't such a good idea. Watching their photo move across the screen, he finally moved his mouse to remove the screensaver. The photo and black background disappeared, and he saw that the screen contained an email from Carrie's Crosby and Knox account. He wondered why she left him on the screen, since she told him that their corporate system needed to be protected for a variety of legal reasons. She was always paranoid about him seeing her messages when she logged into her corporate account from home. After a second of thought, he glanced at the top of the screen, where he saw the familiar hourglass silhouette above the exit command. He realized what had happened. Their unreliable high-speed modem had failed again. Every week or so it would stop communicating with the equipment at the cable company, and the only way to get it back to working was to unplug and plug in the modem. This brutal reset always helped. He had just reached over to the modem to turn it off when the phrase jumped off the screen from the email Carrie had left in a hurry that morning. The phrase that caught his attention was bra and panties, and as he looked at it, he couldn't understand why it was in her work email. At that moment, he withdrew his hand from the modem and sat, amazed, reading the letter his wife received that morning from her boss. It wasn't very long, but the words pierced him like a spear. Carrie, I hope I can catch you before I leave. I really want you to bring that black lingerie set I gave you on our last trip, the one with turquoise accents. You never got around to putting it on for me. My first meeting isn't until 2 p.m. with the governor, so maybe we'll have enough time for you to put it on, and for me to take it off you this morning. Bradley. He read the message 3 times, hoping it would somehow make sense to him beyond the obvious. However, he was left with only the obvious. Carrie cheats on him with Trey, her boss. Kevin didn't realize it, but if there was a witness who saw him sitting at the computer, he would say that Kevin was looking at the screen, periodically opening and closing his mouth, like a goldfish in an aquarium. Kevin finally shook his head and rose to his feet, pushing his chair so hard that it hit the wall as Kevin left the room. He knew which black lingerie set Trey was talking about. He saw it in Carrie's underwear drawer when she was packing, and it was still there when she closed and zipped the suitcase. He prayed that it was still there, because it might mean that the letter was a joke, some kind of sick joke. His hand shook as he opened the drawer, and it was immediately obvious that the set of underwear, the one with the bluish-green bows decorating the front clasp of the bra and the thin ribbons on the sides of the panties, was no longer there. He quickly checked all her drawers, praying that she would just move it, but he couldn't find it anywhere. When he realized that his wife had returned to the room and taken the missing linens with her, Kevin sat on the edge of their bed and tried to remember what Carrie told him about them when she brought them home. Kevin saw them as she was unpacking that day and took them from her hands, saying, "For me, that is, for you to wear for me." He remembered how stupidly he smiled at her. Carrie smiled flirtatiously at him, taking the underwear from his hands, and said, "Not for tonight. I wouldn't want you to tear them in your rush to undress me. I bought them on sale at Victoria's Secret for half price, but they are still expensive." He remembered how she had put them in the drawer, and they had not occurred to him until that morning. They made love that night, as they always did when Carrie returned from her 2-week trips. She didn't need to wear sexy lingerie to turn him on. She could always achieve this simply by being next to him. Kevin sat for a few minutes, thinking about the letter and the laundry. He finally decided that it couldn't mean what it seemed. There were no signs or signals that he thought there should be if a wife was cheating on her husband. She was as loving as ever, eager to be near him. He couldn't remember the last time they'd had a serious argument, let alone a fight, and to be honest, their lovemaking had been even more frequent than after their Mexican vacation. There just must be something he's missing that could explain this message. He returned to the computer and, by manipulating the browser's stop button, moving back and forth between screens, managed to get the cursor back to normal. With any luck, her exit command didn't go through, and he'll be able to look at her email to see if there's more from this bastard. Mentally, he crossed his fingers, rebooting the modem and waiting for the green lights to appear on it. As they lit up, he took a closer look at her mail and folders displayed on the web page behind her. After reducing the size of the laundry message, he looked closely and saw that the only open folder was Inbox, so he clicked on it and found 4 more messages. He opened them one by one and found that each one was related to legal matters that meant nothing to him. He began to fear that there might be nothing left that he could use in his attempt to understand what, if anything, was going on between Carrie and her boss. But when he started looking through the names of her folders, he got lucky. Between the folders with the names of 2 local companies was another one called Personal. He didn't hesitate before clicking on it, hoping it would be the one he was looking for. The folder contained a full-screen message with headlines, and he saw that about half of them were from her boss. The folder was sorted by date, and he opened the first message warily, afraid of what he might find. The first message was very long, and as he read it, the color and emotion left his face. He read it a second time, gritting his teeth. When he finished the second reading, he turned on their printer and printed out the entire message. While the message was being typed, he accidentally glanced at his watch and realized that he would be late if he did not immediately leave for work. Now he couldn't concentrate on his work, so he picked up his cell phone and said he was sick, which wasn't too far from the truth. The printer finished, and he closed the message he was reading and printing and moved on to the next one. Over the next hour, he mechanically selected and read messages, typed most of them, and then forwarded copies of all of them to his personal email account. When he finished with the messages, his eyes were full of tears, and he realized that his marriage was over. After taking one last look at Carrie's Crosby and Knox email and finding nothing else that seemed important, he logged out of her account on the corporate website and logged into his email. He created a separate folder and moved all forwarded messages there. The last thing he did was change his password because he couldn't remember if Carrie knew his old one. He wanted to keep these emails available in case he needed to print more copies. Turning off the computer, he grabbed the printed messages and his cold cup of coffee and returned to the kitchen. He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, sat down at the kitchen table, and read the messages again. He was surprised by how much they told him, especially when they were placed in the context of what he remembered about the last 6 months and Carrie's trips to the state capitol with Trey. Carrie had only been at her new job for a week when she was told that she would have to accompany her boss to the Capitol to record depositions, search and print anything he might require from their corporate files, and provide any assistance needed. Their firm lobbied the governor's office on behalf of local businesses and businessmen and also represented other clients in state court. It all seemed so legit when she first told him about it. He now saw that Trey was probably targeting his wife, and that some trips did not really require her presence for business purposes. Now he also saw that Carrie soon became a willing participant in her meetings with Trey. Reconstructing from emails and his memories, Kevin knew that it was likely on their second trip that Trey had seduced his wife, although it was possible that it had happened on the first trip. The first email in her personal inbox was a reply from Trey to her letter, thanking him for the beautiful Gucci handbag he had given her and for the wonderful dinner they had together. She also mentioned how she liked everything else, although her post didn't specify what that meant. His response, however, mentioned their night together, so Kevin knew what she was talking about. This first message also explained the purse that had suddenly appeared in her possession a few months ago. When he asked her how she could afford it, she laughed and called it a $1.40 knockoff that she bought at a kiosk at the mall. Knowing that her betrayal began so long ago and how easy it was for her to lie, he felt sick. This is not the Carrie he remembered and loved. The emails continued regularly, usually right before or right after one of their trips. He assumed that between trips they talked in person without the need for email, or that the messages she saved were more important to her. It was impossible to tell, and in truth, it didn't matter. In the third or fourth email, he discovered how they were hiding their meetings from him and the office. They always stayed at the same hotel and booked the same 2 rooms. Kevin didn't realize it, but every evening when he called her around 10 o'clock in room 612 of the Hyatt Inn, she was there just to wait for his call. After he called her, she would join Trey in his room for the night. It seemed that he had become so predictable that they could deceive him like a trout. Their jokes about how they wished he would call a little earlier so they could meet sooner cut him like a razor. He never had seen this side of Carrie before, although it matched his impressions of her boss. Another letter explained the expensive-looking diamond earrings Carrie wore to Crosby and Knox's Christmas party. She told him they were zirconia earrings, but the letter showed him they were real, a very expensive Christmas gift from her lover. Once again, the message in her inbox was a response from Trey to her initial message, thanking her for the extravagant gift. It seemed to Kevin that she was overacting with her gratitude, but it made him wonder how she thanked him personally. He couldn't believe they only met every 2 weeks for 2 nights at the Hyatt Inn. He was sure they must have met at other times, and finally, on a second reading of one of the later emails, he found a clue when Trey mentioned working at a condominium. After some concentrated thought, Kevin remembered that Carrie once told him that her boss lived on the ninth floor of a condominium building overlooking the river park. It now seemed likely that they had met during the day at his condominium, either under the guise of work, or perhaps they had met there at lunchtime. No matter how hard Kevin tried, he couldn't remember a single time when Carrie seemed to have recently gotten laid. If she had slept with Trey during the week she was in town, as he was now sure, she had been very careful to remove all evidence of it before returning home. Of course, this could simply be a case of him fitting the mold of a blind and gullible, deceived husband. It was almost noon when he finished rereading all the emails and put them aside. He knew he would have to decide what to do before Carrie returned to town with Trey. She usually arrived early on Friday afternoon and immediately took a taxi home from the airport. When he thought about it, it became ironic that her greatest danger had already come while she was out of town. Kevin slowly stood up from the kitchen table, grabbed 2 more beers from the refrigerator, and headed into the living room, where he stretched out on the couch with the first bottle in his hand. He noticed that it was noon and wondered where the time had gone. He couldn't believe that almost 5 hours had passed since he walked through the door after taking his wife to meet her lover at the airport. He realized that they must have planned a lot carefully because he rarely saw Trey when he walked Carrie to the airport. He was seen standing in the waiting room a couple of times, but always completely ignored them. By 6 p.m. that day, Kevin was barely conscious. During the day, he went to the bathroom several times and returned to the kitchen, bringing 2 beers each time. His last trip was unsuccessful because the refrigerator was empty. He paused for a moment to look at the row of empty bottles on the kitchen counter and realized that there were 12 of them, the full contents of the 2 6s he had bought just the day before. They should have lasted him at least a couple of weeks, and under normal circumstances they would have. Now, having drunk a dozen and eaten nothing, he desperately needed sleep. He managed to make it to the bed before completely passing out in his clothes, right on the covers. It was 10:15 when the phone ringing woke Kevin from where his mind had gone when he passed out. It was a place full of images of Carrie and him doing the things they had enjoyed since they met 8 years ago. As he tried to get up, he glanced at his watch and realized it was probably Carrie calling to find out why he hadn't called her at the Hyatt Inn. Everything he had learned came flooding back to him, and he decided to wait until she returned home before confronting her. The answering machine had just started to pick up a call when he picked up and said, "Hello, is that you, Carrie?" "Yes, it's me. Why didn't you call? You always call by this time." "Something happened." He sensed a hint of worry in her voice and wondered why. In his anger, he almost said he was sorry for keeping her from meeting Trey, but he stopped himself and instead replied, "Sorry, Carrie, I fell asleep." He hoped his tone wouldn't give away his true feelings, but then he wondered why he should even bother. "You've never done that before. What happened?" There was a little dissatisfaction in her voice, and he almost decided to answer in a way that would show that he knew, but again he restrained himself. Instead, he responded as nicely as possible. "I had a couple of beers after work, and they probably knocked me out." He decided to go on the offensive and asked, "So, how was your day? Were you busy this morning? I hope Trey doesn't make you work too hard." Carrie hesitated a bit before answering, "No, I wasn't very busy." "Why do you ask? You almost never take any interest in my work here." "No reason, just having a conversation. Everything here is as good as it can be. And you? Are you behaving well?" He decided to ask another leading question to see her reaction. She answered very quickly, "What do you mean? Of course I behave well. Why do you ask?" He felt a little worry in her voice again. He was in no hurry to answer. "Just kidding. I know you will always behave well. I trusted you completely, and I know that my trust is safe with you." She was a little confused, answering, "Of course. I'm just wondering why you said that. You've never said anything like that before. Just forget. I didn't mean anything by it. He waited a few seconds before continuing, I should probably go to bed. Beer seems to put me to sleep. Okay, Kevin, I'll let you go. Be sure to get some sleep. Love you. Kevin wasn't going to repeat those last two words to her, so he said, Okay, I'll do it. Bye, Carrie. He hung up and headed to the bathroom, where he got rid of the last of his beer. He felt a little better now after getting some sleep, although of course he wouldn't be able to drive. He returned to the kitchen and sat down next to the phone, waiting silently for 15 minutes. When the time was up, he dialed the Hyatt Inn number, which he knew by heart from the many times he had called her there before, and asked to speak to number 612. Unsurprisingly, the phone did not answer even after a dozen rings before he hung up. He wondered if they were now discussing some new plan to get him to call her earlier in the future, and he also wondered if his failed call to Carrie would affect their hookup that night. He finally decided that he really didn't care, but then he realized that they were probably going to have sex while he sat there thinking about it. This realization brought tears to his eyes again as he stumbled towards the bed, this time undressing before crawling under the covers. The next morning, he was surprised that he didn't feel so bad from his drinking the night before. After the shower, he felt well enough to go to work and spend the day there, although his thoughts were on Carrie rather than fuel filters, injectors, and precision fuel pumps. He performed his tasks mechanically, and more than one employee looked at him questioningly when he didn't seem to understand what they were telling him. He was extremely glad when the day was over. All his thoughts, nothing was addressed about Carrie and the fact that she was cheating on him with her boss. On the way home, he grabbed a couple of burgers and fries, not the kind of food he usually ate. He had no appetite, so it didn't matter what he ate. He washed it down with 2 bottles of beer from the 6 he bought on the way home. He knew he couldn't drink a dozen bottles every night, and he deliberately returned the second 6 to the shelf before heading to the checkout. At 8 p.m., he called room 612 at the Hyatt Inn, but no one answered after 10 calls. The letters made it clear to him that Carrie was only in the room from about 9:30 to 10, the normal window for his nightly calls. As a test, he called the room every half hour, making the 4th call at 9:25. None of the calls were answered, and after 10 rings, he hung up each time. His last call was at 9:45, and Carrie answered the second call. Hi, Kevin. I guess you didn't sleep today. You call on time. I was going to crawl under the covers to get a good night's sleep, but I decided to wait for you to call. She laughed. I'm cheerful today, Carrie. I just watched TV and waited for the time to call. How did you spend your evening? He hoped that she wouldn't suspect him of anything. He knew he'd asked her questions like this before, so he didn't think she'd be surprised. Did the same thing as you, Kevin. Just laying here, watching TV. I just turned off the sound. Before that, I took a nice hot bath. She was very talkative, and it seemed to Kevin that she was unaware of his doubts. That's great, Carrie. You should be well rested for tomorrow evening. We'll try to keep you busy when you get back. She giggled and said, Are you making plans yet? I'm looking forward to it. They talked for another 5 minutes without saying anything important. Kevin realized she was telling one lie after another and finally said, I have to go. I have a couple things to do before bed. See you tomorrow. Bye. Bye, honey. I'm looking forward to tomorrow evening. Love you. Kevin hung up without saying anything in response. Once again, he patiently looked at his watch, waiting 15 minutes before calling room 612 at the Hyatt Inn, and once again the phone did not answer after 10 rings. Kevin came to work at his usual time the next day, but took the afternoon off. He wanted to be home when Carrie arrived from the airport so he could talk to her right away. He had no idea how it would go, but he knew they wouldn't spend the night under the same roof. One of them would find a new place to live before nightfall, and he didn't care who it was. He was home a little after 1 p.m. and knew he would probably have to wait about an hour before she arrived. Considering how bad he felt when he found out what had happened, he was surprised at how calm he was now waiting for her. He felt like there was an empty hole inside him, and he knew tears were close, but he forced himself through the next couple of hours with his dignity intact. He spent hours reminiscing about their entire life together, and all he could remember were the good times. The letters and what happened after they were discovered seemed from another universe. They didn't fit into any of Carrie's memories. He was standing at the kitchen sink when he heard her open the front door. A moment later, he heard the wheels of her luggage rolling down the corridor, approaching him and their last seconds as a couple. When she entered the kitchen, she didn't seem to notice him at first. "Kevin, what are you doing here? Why are you not at work?" There was surprise on her face when she saw him, but now it was replaced by anxiety. "I've been waiting for you, Carrie." He spoke very evenly, without emotion. His face was just as impassive. She looked at him with more concern and said, "You were waiting for me. For what?" He didn't answer her, instead picking up a stack of letters and throwing them on the table in front of her. She looked at him again, then reached for the papers. Her face was curious at first, then it was replaced by shock. Her face paled as she flipped through the pages, glancing at each one for only a split second. When she finished the last one, she threw them back on the table and stood there for a few moments as her face slowly returned to color. She didn't look at him when she said, "So you know." She paused for a few more moments and continued, "How did you find this? This is from my work email." "Modem," was all he could say, trying to get his emotions under control. Carrie quickly understood and nodded, saying, "The modem broke again and my email was still on the screen, right?" When he was able to speak with control, Kevin said, "Yes, if it weren't for this, I probably would never have known. You were very good at keeping it a secret." Carrie said nothing and seemed lost in thought before slowly turning around and taking her cell phone from her bag. A few seconds later, she was talking on the phone, her back turned to Kevin. "Kevin knows. No matter how he found out, does it matter?" "Yes. I'll call a taxi. Meet me there. Bye." She closed her cell phone and partially turned to Kevin before saying, "I'll leave. I'm so sorry you found out about it this way. I'll be back tomorrow for the rest of my things." She turned again and walked away, dragging her travel bag behind her. Kevin looked at her back in disbelief and shouted angrily, "Is that all? No explanation? Do you only regret that I found out this way?" Still standing with her back to him, Carrie said, "What's there to explain? I'd been with Bradley enough in the past 6 months that I quickly became accustomed to being with him completely. He was so kind to me. You can't compare to him, Kevin. Sorry." The tears that were close to the surface burst out as Kevin said, "Good to you. What's the matter? And the money he spends on you? I know about handbags, earrings, and some other things. Is this all for this?" Carrie hesitated before answering. "Gifts are just part of it. Bradley does everything at the highest level, and I'm ready to live at the highest level." After she finished speaking, she walked down the hallway to their bedroom and stayed there for almost 5 minutes while Kevin struggled to pull himself together. He found it hard to believe that this was all because of what Trey could give her. He knew that they were still far from any prosperity, but the Carrie he knew never complained. Had he really underestimated her that much? When she returned from the bedroom, she was carrying a full wardrobe bag. She must have called a taxi from the bedroom because as soon as she stepped into the kitchen, two short car horns sounded from outside. Without further conversation, Carrie picked up her travel bag and left the house. Kevin watched her silently and watched as the taxi driver rushed to the house to pick up her luggage. She got into the taxi and waited until the driver pulled away before taking one last look at Kevin. It seemed to him that she was crying. Walking back into the kitchen, Kevin said, "What the hell just happened here?" But the answer was no one, so he sat down at the kitchen table and tried to understand what had happened to his once loving wife. The next day, Saturday, Kevin was still in shock and disbelief at how easily Carrie had left their marriage, their home, and him. A little after noon, she called and said she would come get the rest of her things. When she arrived, her father was with her, bringing their van and several empty boxes. While he and Carrie were carrying boxes into the bedroom, Kevin walked into the living room and sat quietly on the sofa. A few minutes later, Carrie's father, Joseph Kane, joined him. They sat quietly for several minutes before Kevin spoke. "Did she tell you what was going on?" Kevin asked. Her father looked a little confused, but finally responded, "Sorry, Kevin. It seems she is determined to go to her boss. Her mother, and I don't understand why she wants to leave you for him. We've never met this person, but he'd have to be really great to be better than you." Kevin was still confused and said, "It seems like it's about what he can give her. This is the only thing that makes any sense, and not much." He looked at his father-in-law and continued, "I know it sounds strange, but that's all I can understand. She didn't say she loved him, or that she stopped loving me." Joseph sat silently for a while, but finally said, "Does it really matter?" Kevin thought for a moment before answering, "No, probably not. She slept with him regularly for several months. I can't forgive this, even if it seemed like she wanted to." Both men sat in silence until Carrie came out and said, "I took everything I wanted to keep. Everything else you can do with it what you want. Give it away or throw it away." There were tears in her eyes as she quickly looked around the living room before continuing to move boxes out. Her father followed her with another box before returning for the rest. After they left, Kevin returned to the bedroom and noticed that there were still some of her things left in the closet that Carrie had been using. He opened the dresser drawers that were hers and saw that there were some items left there too. There were still a few sets in her lingerie drawer that he remembered giving her for her birthdays and Valentine's Day. He picked up one of the bras he had given her and then threw it back into the drawer in disgust. She could have at least taken them with her and thrown them away. It's almost like she's trying to be mean. He went to the kitchen and took a couple of green garbage bags. After a few minutes, he gathered her remaining clothes into bags and tied them, ready to donate to charity. Another bag of cosmetics and toiletries she left in the bedroom and bathroom went in the trash. An hour later, there was nothing left in these two rooms that would remind Carrie. He knew he would find more of her things, but for now he was content to get rid of the last obvious traces of her presence. He spent the rest of the day lying on the bed they once shared, thinking about what he should do and imagining different scenarios for revenge. He eventually realized that despite his anger, he was not inclined to violence or revenge, and that he would be better off using his energy to forget about her, no matter how difficult it was. The weekend ended quickly, although Kevin couldn't remember much about it. He bought a couple more sixes of beer, and now they were all lying in the trash, empty. He knew it was unusual for him to drink to this extent, but it was the only way he felt he could get through the weekend. Trying to understand why Carrie did what she did was driving him crazy, and the only solution was to force himself to stop asking the question. By Monday, he felt a little better, more at peace with the facts of what had happened, whether or not he could explain them. He was not in the best shape at work on Monday and Tuesday. On Tuesday, he called the Crosby and Knox office to find out Carrie's new mail forwarding address. He was not connected to her when he asked. Instead, the secretary returned a few minutes later with the information that Carrie would email him the information he needed. Later that evening, when he checked his email, there was an email from Carrie's work account containing only her new forwarding address, an address he recognized as the 9th floor of the condominium where Trey lived. Wednesday started out as a normal day at work for Kevin until he was called into the office for a mid-morning phone call. It was his bank, concerned that he should do something about the mortgage payment that didn't go through his account. After several minutes of heated argument with the loan officer at the bank, Kevin learned that both bank accounts he and Carrie used now showed their balances. A few more questions revealed that almost $20,000 had been transferred from them on Monday. Kevin now found himself in a financial bind, and although he could barely afford it, he took time off work to try and sort out the mess. The first thing he did was head straight to the law firm of Crosby and Knox. He was furious with Carrie and was going to demand half the money back on the bills. He believes she stole almost $10,000 from him. He was determined as he entered the firm's office, walked past the secretary, and headed straight to Carrie's desk. She didn't see him coming and looked up in fear as he started talking loudly to her from 10 feet away. "What the hell are you doing, emptying our bank accounts? I want half of this money back now." Bradley Knox Roman III chose that moment to step out of his office and see what was going on, and as soon as Kevin noticed him, he changed course, heading towards the lawyer in the threesome. Kevin managed to get within 2 feet of him, but was faced with his office door slamming shut. He heard the bolt click as he pulled the door handle. Obviously, he won't be talking to Trey anytime soon. He quickly turned to Carrie just in time to block her from her desk. She quickly sat back down, her face and neck flushed, and a look of embarrassment on her face. "Well, where is my money, Carrie? What do you think you're doing? All this for the sake of money, that you are ready to take what does not belong to you." Kevin was practically screaming, and people all over the office listened to him and began to gather nearby, wanting to see what was happening. Carrie finally found her voice and said, "I'll take the money and you can keep the car, house, and furniture." She reached into the stack of envelopes and packages waiting for the courier and pulled out an envelope, which she handed to him. "Everything is in this envelope, and if you want to argue, hire a lawyer. I really hoped you'd get it before you found out the money was gone, and I think you'll find that fair enough." Before he could open the envelope, 2 guards ran up to him, each with a hand on a taser clipped to his belt. Sturdy said, "You better leave now. If you don't leave immediately, you will be arrested. We are authorized to use these tasers, so don't test us." Kevin realized that disobedience would lead to nothing good, so he turned and left, finally saying, "You have turned into a greedy bitch. I don't understand how you've changed so much. The Carrie I am, I knew I wouldn't have done that." He took one last look at her boss's locked office door and shouted, "You stay locked, Trey, you coward." He noticed that a couple of Carrie's colleagues giggled at his remark, apparently enjoying watching the cowardly lawyer's reaction to Kevin's visit. When he returned to his car, he tore the envelope. He soon realized that Carrie had given all the details of their assets and liabilities to Trey, who had organized them into a spreadsheet that seemed to show an equal split between them if she took the cash and he kept the car, house, and furniture. They had very few obligations other than a mortgage and an outstanding credit card balance. The chart showed that everyone would be responsible for their credit card debt, so at least they wouldn't have to worry about it. Upon closer examination of the figures, he realized that all of this depended on his agreement to receive an equity interest in an overvalued house with furniture that was probably not worth the stated amount. He realized that if he tried to get his share of the $20,000 in cash, it wouldn't happen because their numbers didn't include realtor commissions and legal fees for selling the house. It looked good on paper and was exactly what he expected from a crafty lawyer. After crumpling the papers back into the envelope, Kevin headed to the bank, where he was able to obtain a line of credit that would cover his outstanding mortgage payment and any other expenses that might arise before he received his next paycheck and deposited it into the account. He hoped that he would be able to cope with the mortgage, the new loan, and all the household expenses until he got things in order. He could always count on their savings to weather any fluctuations in income or unexpected expenses. Now he knew that it would take him a couple of months to get everything in order. The next 2 weeks were a series of emotional ups and downs for Kevin. The day after his visit to Crosby and Knox, he received an official letter warning him to stay away from Carrie and Bradley Knox Roman III, or he would be charged with stalking and issued an order to remain 100 yards away from both of them. This angered him so much that he almost decided to challenge them, but ultimately realized that it would probably backfire on him. A week later, his anger returned when he received notice that Carrie had filed for divorce using the terms outlined in the table. $200 and a couple more hours of lost earnings led to another lawyer in the trio telling him that while it wasn't entirely fair, it would cost more to fight for it than it was worth. When he wasn't annoyed by letters and notifications from Carrie and Trey, Kevin's life began to return to normal. 3 weeks after Carrie left, he realized he needed to do more to remove memories of her from the house. Every time he walked into the bedroom, he saw her sitting at the dressing table that she always used, or lying on the bed, reading a book, one of her favorite pastimes. He began redecorating the house to create a new environment, first by removing the vanity and hiding it in the basement. He was able to rearrange the furniture in the bedroom to give the room a new look that he and Carrie had not used. In the bathroom, he was able to remove some of the decorations she had placed on the walls, giving the room a new look. When he finished, he felt better, more confident in calling the house his own. As he redecorated the house, he realized that there were more obvious reminders of Carrie that he would have to deal with. These were photographs of her or them together, hanging on several walls and standing on tables and the fireplace in the living room. One night, he decided to put away all these images and memories of her and went around the house, removing photographs from their frames and putting them in a box he found in the basement. When he finished that, he moved on to their collection of photo albums that were kept in the bookcase in the living room. The first album he picked up contained almost exclusively photos of the two of them, and after he put away a few that were of him alone or of friends he still valued, he put the album with the remaining photos in a box. The next album was from their wedding, and the only photos he kept were of him and his parents. Both of his parents had since died, and the photographs were among the last records of them. The rest of the book went into the box. He continued to flip through the pages of the remaining albums, leaving most of the photos in place before adding the books to the box. The last album he took off the shelf contained mostly the photographs he had brought into their marriage. Many were from his childhood and school years, although there were a few from Carrie that he removed and added to the pile in the box. Leafing through a book with memories of his youth, he came across one photo that made him stop. It was a photo of him with Carol Reese, his girlfriend for most of his high school years. He wondered what she was doing now and what happened to her after she left for university. They broke up when she moved away, and he eventually went to vocational school, where he met Carrie. He carefully placed this book of memories from his younger years back on the shelf, and placed the small stack of photographs he had saved from other books on it, ready to add them later. For now he felt he had done enough and would return to the photographs another day. He managed to put away the last obvious reminders of Carrie, although this did not exclude the many times when he thought about her during the day and especially at night, lying in their marital bed. Before he went to bed that night, he pulled out the local telephone directory and looked up the entries for the name Reese. Caroline was missing, which didn't surprise him, but he also couldn't find a record of her widowed mother, Marion Reese. He still remembered their address, but it wasn't listed under the name Reese. There were only a few entries in the directory for the name Reese, none of which were related to his memories of Caroline. His curiosity satisfied, he put the book away and thought no more about the only woman who had ever meant anything to him. About 6 weeks after Carrie's hasty departure from his life, Kevin was alarmed by a knock on the door, which pulled him away from his late-night TV. Night after night he sat there, watching programs that had no meaning to him except as a means to fill the hours between dinner and bed. Opening the door, he was surprised to see Carrie's brother, Robert Kane. "Hello, Robert. Come in. I didn't expect to see you." Kevin stepped back to allow Carrie's older brother to enter the house. As he passed Kevin, Robert turned, tapped him on the shoulder, and said, "How are you, Kevin? I tried to call you, but the answering machine said your number was no longer in service." "Oh yeah, I canceled my regular phone line and now only use my cell phone. I didn't see the point in the extra expense." Kevin led him into the living room where they sat in separate chairs. "How about a beer, Robert?" "Of course, Kevin, I won't refuse." Kevin left for a moment and returned with 2 open bottles, handing one to his old friend. "I don't think you need a glass for this." "No, that'll do." Both men took swigs from their bottles before Kevin asked, "So what brings you here? I was wondering if I'd see you again after Carrie left." Robert sat a little uncomfortably in his chair before saying, "Actually, that's why I'm here. You know, she's always been my wife's best friend, and Carrie came to visit her 2 days ago. I told Carrie what I thought about her cheating on you with her boss, and after that Carrie and Susan went into the kitchen to talk alone. I went to the garage because I was too mad at her to be around." Thank you for your support, Robert, but I don't want to come between you and your sister. What's done is done, and I'm trying to move on with my life. Well, she's my little sister, and I know this will pass, but I can't stand her right now. My parents aren't happy either, but they'll be with her no matter what. Kevin looked down at his beer dejectedly before saying, "Family comes first." Robert continued, "Anyway, I left the kitchen door ajar when I went into the garage and could hear them talking. Even though I didn't want to talk to her, I decided to listen to what Carrie had to say. I sat by the kitchen door and just listened." Kevin was clearly interested in what Robert had to say next, so he leaned forward and asked, "Did she say anything about that? I'm still trying to figure out what she saw in this guy other than his money." "You seem to have hit the nail on the head. I can't exactly recreate their conversation, but I can get the gist of it. When you caught her texting, she quickly decided to ditch you and take a chance with the boss. She thought you'd never forgive her, so I chose Plan B." "Wasn't she already with him?" Kevin asked, looking a little puzzled. "Apparently not. She told Susan that while the gifts and lifestyle with Bradley were wonderful, you were head and shoulders above in bed. She made it clear that she was going to leave him very soon, maybe even next week, if you didn't catch her. Whatever happened doesn't matter anymore." Kevin took another sip from his bottle and leaned back further in his chair. "She understands that. She knows it's over. I just thought you might be interested to know that she regrets it all a lot now. That's not stopping her from moving quickly with the divorce. I received more papers from the court today. I think Trey has found a friendly judge who is speeding up the process. Haven't heard anything about it, but I heard them mention the term starter husband. They seem to have discussed it before, and when she first got involved with him, she thought he would be a step up for her. One more thing, Susan, I knew this from the very beginning. I'm so angry with Susan that I can't even start a conversation with her for fear that I'll say something unnecessary. So she considers me her initial husband. Isn't that wonderful?" Kevin paused for a moment to control his anger before continuing, "I don't want you fighting with Susan over me, Robert. It's not just Carrie. Based on the tone of their conversation, it sounds like Susan might be thinking the same thing as Carrie. I'm going to talk to her about this as soon as I can without getting angry. My wife has some explaining to do." The men continued talking for another half hour before Robert stood up to leave. He added a few more minor details from the overheard conversation, but nothing significant to Kevin, who was still toying with the starter husband idea when he finally fell asleep a few hours later. The next day after work, Kevin stopped at one of the large grocery stores on his route home. He decided it was time to start eating healthier than what he had been eating for the past 6 weeks. As he put the items on the checkout counter, the cashier asked, "Are you Kevin Riley?" Kevin looked up and immediately recognized her as his former classmate. "Hi, Wendy. I didn't know you worked here. Long time no see." They had a pleasant conversation while Wendy went through his purchase. After paying, Kevin asked, "Listen, Wendy, you were pretty friendly with Caroline Reese. Have you heard anything about what happened to her or her mother?" Wendy thought for a moment before answering, "I remember hearing that she got married, but that was years ago. Her mother still lives in the same house, even though she got married a few years ago." "I haven't heard of that. Do you know Mrs. Roy Reese's new wife's last name?" Wendy thought a little more and replied, "I think it's something with Smith, Smitherman or Smithson, maybe." The old friends finally said goodbye, agreeing to meet for coffee sometime. When he returned home, Kevin was in a better mood than he had been in a long time. Seeing his old friend brought back many fond memories, and he was grateful for any opportunity to take his mind off his soon-to-be ex-wife. After he cooked himself a healthy dinner for the first time in weeks, he went for a short run to warm up before making it his new evening routine, eating well followed by regular exercise. Returning from a run, he decided to look for Caroline's mother's phone number and soon found it in the phone book under the name Smithers. Realizing that there was no time like the present, he dialed the number. Kevin was soon talking to Marion Smithers and got straight to the point. I was hoping to get Caroline's address. I would like to write her a few lines. I was just on my way to see her. Her last name is Jansen now, and you don't need to write. You can just call her. She dictated the number and added that Caroline was now a widow. Since she was in a hurry, they quickly popped. After the call, Kevin looked up Caroline Jansen in the phone book and noticed that her address was in an area known to be a low-income neighborhood. This surprised him, and he wondered why Caroline lived there. He decided that one day he would call her. Kevin changed a lot over the next few days. His new healthy lifestyle had a positive effect on his mood, and he was now much more cheerful at work. He really began to imagine that life without Carrie was possible. And just as this new thinking took hold, a new letter from Carrie gave him even more to think about. It was a very short letter, consisting of just one line. I never considered you to be my first husband. It was obvious that Robert and Susan had discussed what Robert had overheard and told Kevin a few days ago. Susan apparently relayed the information that Robert had overheard their conversation and passed it on to Kevin. The message brought back everything Kevin had tried to forget. After a few minutes of thought, he replied, "Actions speak louder than words." She did not respond to this message. Almost exactly 3 months after Carrie left their home for Trey, Kevin received the final divorce papers. Trey's ability to speed up the process surprised him. After returning from a run, he celebrated his new status as a divorced man with one cold beer. When he finished it, he sat down at the computer and sent Carrie a message. "You got what you wanted." This was their last letter to each other, and she did not answer it. Later that night, after rereading and archiving his divorce, Kevin decided it was time to call Caroline Jansen to say hello. He'd thought about calling her a few times in the past weeks since he'd gotten her number, but he just hadn't been ready to take that step yet. Since he was divorced and she was a widow, he thought maybe they could have dinner or a few drinks together for old time's sake. With that thought in mind, he dialed her number. When she answered, he had barely introduced himself before she said, "Kevin, I'm so glad you called. Mom said you called, and I was starting to think you decided not to call." The old friends spent the next hour telling each other about the most important moments in their lives since high school. Kevin learned that Caroline married Frank Jansen in her final year at university. He served in the National Guard and was called to duty in Iraq. 3 months after arriving there, she was informed that a man on a bicycle had blown himself up at a checkpoint her husband was guarding, killing him and another soldier. This left her a widow with a 4-year-old daughter, Rissy. They lived on a survivor's pension she received from the Army, but once her daughter started school, Caroline planned to return to work as an occupational therapist. Kevin, in turn, told Caroline about his new status and some of the details of how and why he became a divorcee. Eventually, it was time to say goodbye as Caroline had to put her daughter to bed. Kevin decided now was the time to see if Caroline was interested in meeting him. "So, Caroline, how about we have dinner or drinks together some evening?" Caroline hesitated before answering, "Sorry, Kevin, I'm not ready for that yet. My daughter is my top priority right now. Maybe another time." Kevin was very disappointed as he thought they were getting back together after all these years. "It's okay, Caroline. I hope I didn't upset you with my proposal. Goodbye and good luck, Caroline." He felt bad that her reaction hurt him so much, so he quickly hung up. The official divorce and the abandonment of his old girlfriend together led him to the refrigerator for another beer, and after it was finished, he went straight to bed. This day turned out to be emotionally difficult for him. The next 2 months flew by for Kevin. His daily routine became what kept him going, and he knew that he would eventually have to decide what to do with the rest of his life. He knew there was no point in rushing into a new relationship right away, so he put that part of his life on hold, wanting to wait until Carrie was banished to the furthest reaches of his memory. He still found it difficult to go more than a few hours without thinking about her, although he noticed that these memories became less painful as time passed. Kevin canceled his newspaper subscription several months ago when he cut off his landline and premium cable channels to cut costs. He now depended on newspapers left in the cafeteria by his co-workers, who rarely brought one to work. Sometimes he listened to local news on the radio, but again, not regularly. It was in this ignorant state that he came to work that morning. During his morning coffee break, he was having an animated conversation about work with another mechanic when one of the other men threw a newspaper in front of him and said, "You better read this, Kevin." Kevin picked up the newspaper and read the headline, "One dead, one critical." The accompanying article was about a fatal accident that occurred the previous night on the road leading out of a local country club. The driver lost control of his car and it slid into a ditch, overturning several times. The driver, identified as Bradley Knox Roman 3, was ejected from the vehicle, which then overturned on top of him. The passenger, Kerry Riley, suffered serious injuries and was in the intensive care unit at a local hospital. Alcohol may have been a factor in the crash, police said. After reading the article twice, Kevin returned the paper to the man who gave it to him and said, "I can't say I'm sorry about his death. I hope Carrie survives, but other than that, I think I'm too over her to care." The man looked at him carefully before saying, "Are you sure, Kevin? I know it was really hard for you when she left. You were practically useless here for a long time," he said, laughing. "Yes, I'm sure. Reading this article has proven that to me. All I have is normal human compassion for her. I have no desire to rush to her bedside." Reading this news was a watershed moment for Kevin. Now he could admit to himself that he had truly overcome the memories of Carrie, and he felt the weight lifted from his shoulders. Although he regretted the situation she and her parents found themselves in, he was glad that he had reached a point where he knew he could move on with his life. Over the next few days, local news channels confirmed that Bradley Knox Roman 3 was legally drunk when he drove off the road. The same messages still called Carrie unconscious and in critical condition. Kevin's reaction to the news was to invite one of the secretaries to dinner, an evening they both enjoyed. He was very pleased to enjoy the woman's company again, hugging her as they danced and enjoying a few passionate kisses as he dropped her off. They weren't planning any further dates, but it was enough for Kevin to know that he was completely out of the rut he'd been in for so long. "What brings you here, Robert? Long time no see." "Nothing much, Kevin. I was in the area, as they say. I'm sorry about what happened to Carrie. I imagine this is causing great concern for your family. There hasn't been anything in the papers lately. Is she getting better?" Robert took a long sip of his beer before answering, "Yeah, it was really hard on Mom and Dad. She had a pretty bad head injury when she was thrown in the car. Thank God she had her seat belt on. That idiot she's with didn't wear a seat belt and paid a high price." It appears Carrie also paid a heavy price for his decision to drink and drive. Someone should file a claim against his estate for her injuries. Robert sighed and said, "Yes, Dad and I discussed it. Carrie is still in a drug-induced coma. They had to perform major surgery on her because of the damage to her head. Once the swelling goes down, they will stop giving her the drugs and they'll see if she comes out of it. They don't make any guarantees." "I didn't know she was in such a serious condition. The news always only mentioned that she was in intensive care. Give my best wishes to your parents when you see them." Robert looked at Kevin and said, "I will. Thank you for your concern. Actually, they were wondering why you didn't come to the hospital. I tried to explain to them that you had moved on and Carrie was no longer a part of your life." Kevin laughed quietly and said, "Yeah, I think I've managed to move on. I went on my first date in years the other day. While I'm sorry she suffered such serious injuries, it's not something I'm going to let affect my life. A year ago, I would have gone crazy in this situation, but Carrie kind of cured me from it." They continued talking about sports and work and did not return to the topic of Carrie until the very end of Robert's visit. As he was about to leave, he said, "By the way, Kevin, Susan, and I seem to have gotten over that problem I talked to you about last time. She sees what a mess Carrie is in, even before this accident, and has decided that she's more than happy to be my wife. It seems like it was a case of the grass always seeming greener." glad to hear that, Robert. Carrie must have confused Susan. Somewhere along the way, Carrie forgot her commitment to me and our marriage. Things could have been much worse. We could have had children. They shook hands and Robert went home. Another 6 weeks went by quickly for Kevin. He hadn't heard anything about what happened to Carrie and assumed that meant her recovery was going well. He was able to become more involved in dating and averaged 1 date per week during this period. He dated Jean, a secretary from work, several times and spent a couple of nights at her apartment enjoying purely recreational sex with her. Neither of them expected their relationship to go too far, but they both enjoyed their time together. Their nights in her bed helped remove the last obstacles to his return to dating. It was Thursday evening and Kevin had just returned from a run when he heard the doorbell ring. He was very surprised to see his former father-in-law on the threshold when he opened the door. "Come in, Joseph. To what do you owe such an unexpected visit?" The older man remained on the doorstep and said, "I can't come in because I'm heading to the hospital. I would like to ask you to come to the hospital and see Carrie with us and her mother. She just regained consciousness this week. We were hoping that you can meet us there at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon." Kevin looked at him curiously and replied, "I guess I can. What's the matter? Why do you want me to come to the hospital? Our marriage is long over." Joseph looked very relieved and said, "We'd just like you to meet us there if you can. We'll talk about it there. I'm in a big hurry right now. See you tomorrow." The older man quickly turned with a wave of his hand and hurried to his still-running car, leaving Kevin standing on his doorstep, confused. The next day, Kevin rearranged his schedule so that he could take a late lunch and then start his weekend early, after an agreed-upon trip to the hospital. He ended up leaving work at 1 p.m. and instead of having lunch, he smacked on fruit from his lunchbox on the way. He arrived at the hospital early, but decided to go up to Carrie's room. It may be possible to complete this faster than planned. It was just after 1:30 when he stepped out of the elevator on Carrie's floor. He was given the room number at the main reception on the ground floor, and he immediately saw that the room was opposite the nurse's station. He hadn't noticed it before, but now he realized that he was actually a little nervous. He hadn't seen Carrie since that angry visit to her office at Crosby and Knox, and hadn't exchanged letters with her in months. This could have been a difficult experience for him. He took a deep breath, quietly entered the open doors of her private room, and stopped. Instead of waking her, Kevin decided to wait for her parents to arrive. In fact, he was fascinated to see her again. She was as beautiful as ever, and there were no signs of accident on her face and neck, nor on the visible parts of her arms. Only the scar on her head testified to the terrible accident in which she found herself. At some point, he wanted to go over and take her hand, but this desire quickly passed when he remembered some of the contents of the letters he had found so long ago. His jaw tensed, and he reaffirmed his intention to wait. He watched her for about 2 minutes when her eyes slowly opened and focused on him. It was like a light switching on as her face suddenly lit up and she said, "Kevin, you're here. Where have you been? I've missed you so much the last 3 days. Nobody told me where you were." Kevin was completely taken aback by her reaction and questions and replied, "Where do you think I was? I was at home and at work." Carrie's reaction to this answer was complete confusion, and she said, "Why weren't you here when I woke up? Why did you go to work or stay home when I was here?" Now his confusion grew even greater, and he became a little angry at her questions. He quickly said, "Why did you expect me to be here? We're divorced. You went to your lover. Why should I visit you? I'm only here because your parents asked." Her reaction completely surprised and scared Kevin, as she immediately screamed and tried to approach him. She was clearly extremely agitated, saying, "No, no, no, what are you saying?" She began to flail her arms, trying to free herself from the equipment and tubes that were holding her. After a few seconds, she tore the Roman 4 out of her right arm. The alarm on the infusion pump began beeping continuously, which was soon followed by a loud, cutting sound. The beep from the heart monitor as Carrie yanked the cables hard enough to disconnect them from the machine. A few seconds after the alarm started, Two nurses from a nearby station burst into the room. The first one looked at Kevin and asked, "What did you do to her?" She then rushed past him towards Carrie, grabbed her flailing arms, and forced her back onto the bed. She didn't pay attention to Kevin's answer. "I didn't do anything. I was standing at the door the whole time." Carrie muttered incoherent words, trying to thrash around the bed to free herself from the nurse's strong arms. The second nurse quickly assessed the situation and said, "I'll get the straps and call the doctor for permission to sedate." She turned and hurriedly left the room. Kevin slowly stepped back from the bedlam of the hospital room, then turned and shook his head as he walked back to the elevator. "I think she's gone crazy," he said to no one in particular. Approaching the elevator, the doors opened and Carrie's parents stepped out. Before they could say a word to him, their attention was completely captured by the screams and noise from Carrie's room, as well as the sight of a nurse rushing into the room with belts and a syringe in her hands. "What's happened?" Carrie's mother looked at Kevin with concern and continued, "Were you talking to her?" When he answered in the affirmative, she said, "God, no," and they both hurried past him into the room. Kevin was completely perplexed by the strange situation unfolding in front of him, and after he stood for a few seconds, listening and observing what was happening, he pressed the button to call the elevator. As he entered the elevator and the doors began to close, he saw Carrie's father come out of the room, apparently looking for him. Kevin only had time to raise his hand in a quick farewell gesture before the doors closed completely. Excited to be able to start his weekend earlier than expected, Kevin drove straight home from the hospital. On the way home, he replayed the strange scenes that unfolded before him in Carrie's room. None of this made sense to him, and he decided to forget about it. He tried to fulfill Joseph Kane's request, but Carrie's reactions to his visit quickly stopped his efforts. He was sure that the accident had left her with psychological problems, which he was happy to leave to her parents and doctors. Let them deal with it, he decided. After showering and getting dressed, he remembered something that had been coming back to his mind for a while now. He decided to call Caroline Jansen again, hoping that she might have reconsidered her refusal to have dinner with him. If she refuses again, he decides to call Jean from the office and invite her for the evening. He felt that he needed female company to take his mind off Carrie and her strange actions. He almost hung up when the phone started ringing, not sure if he was ready for another rejection from Caroline. But that chance was eliminated when Caroline picked up. "Hey, Caroline. This is Kevin Riley calling. I hope I didn't distract you." "Kevin, no, you weren't distracted. I'm so glad you called again. I tried to contact you several times, but the number in the book didn't work anymore. I was afraid you moved or something. I wanted to apologize for the way I was harsh with you the last time you invited me. I canceled this phone, and now I only use my mobile phone. No need to apologize, Caroline. I'm old enough to handle rejection," he said. "Actually, I called to see if you'd changed your mind, and if you wanted to have dinner with me tonight or tomorrow night." He waited patiently to see what excuse she would offer. Caroline hesitated before answering. "I have plans with my mom and stepdad tomorrow. It's their anniversary." After further hesitation, she continued, "I'm sorry, but today won't work either, because I won't be able to find a nanny for Chris on such short notice." She seemed really upset that she had to say no. "There's an easy solution. We can just take Chris with us. You've talked so much about her that I really want to meet her." Kevin decided after this statement that if she offered another excuse, it would become obvious that she was not interested in meeting him. Caroline laughed before saying, "I doubt you've ever had dinner with a 4-year-old. Taking a child with you really limits your dining options. Well, how about you pick a place where she'll feel comfortable? I just know I want to take you out to dinner, and a family restaurant suits me just fine." He waited patiently for her answer, knowing that it was now or never. Deep down, he really wanted her to say yes. He felt like there was unfinished business between them. Their separation after school was forced due to academic plans, and not because of any obvious divergence of feelings. If you're serious, there's a restaurant that Chris really likes. The food and atmosphere are really good, even though it's a family restaurant. They have a great dessert bar that Chris just loves. It's decided then. I'll pick you up at 5. Just tell me where this place is. Kevin was very pleased, and you could hear it in his voice. Caroline also sounded excited as she replied, "Are you sure you don't mind taking Chris with you?" Kevin laughed before saying, "Absolutely. If she's anything like her mother, I'm sure she'll be pleasant company. I've always found you to be one of the most polite and well-mannered people I've ever met." They continued to joke until Caroline said that she needed to prepare herself and her daughter to go out. Kevin was ecstatic when he hung up, happier than he had been in a long time. He sincerely hoped that their evening would go as he hoped. Later that night, as Kevin lay in bed waiting to sleep, he thought about the details of his dinner with Caroline and Chris. He lay there smiling, pleased with how everything had gone. He now looked forward to Sunday morning, having agreed to accompany them to the church service, from which he had lost the habit many years ago. He was less interested in listening to the sermon than in spending more time with the two Jansons whom he had just invited to dinner. He recalled the beginning of their evening, when he arrived at the house where Caroline lived. He was shocked by the beauty of the woman who met him at the door, so little things changed from what he remembered of her. Their last meeting was more than 10 years ago. Her dark hair was now cut short, and the style suited her very well. Somehow she seemed taller, although he was sure it was just a memory distortion. She was rounded in all the right places, but the beautiful smile and dark eyes he remembered remained. Seeing her for the first time, he held his breath. Chris was like a miniature of her mother, with the same dark hair and eyes. Caroline said she had her father's nose and chin, although Kevin thought she looked more like her mother in those features too. Chris shook his hand lightly upon introduction, and he noticed that she was examining him carefully, so attentively that Kevin wondered if the child would raise any objections to his interest in her mother. He had heard of cases where incompatibility with children had destroyed the relationship between their parents and a potential partner. His fears were quickly dispelled when Chris agreed to take his hand as she walked from Caroline's car to the restaurant. They used her car so they wouldn't have to move the child's seat into his, and he drove while Caroline gave directions and Chris commented on everything that was happening from the back seat. By the time they got there, Kevin had already taken a liking to the inquisitive little girl. Their dinner went very well, and they found plenty to talk about. Chris often intervened in the conversation by asking the question, "What is empty space?" where empty space was a word she did not fully understand. Kevin found it very funny, while Caroline seemed a little embarrassed by the frequent interruptions. After they finished the main course, Kevin was able to convince Chris to go with him to the dessert bar, where they chose and prepared desserts together. Caroline ordered soft-serve ice cream with chocolate sauce, and Kevin picked Chris up so she could make dessert for her mom. Kevin's choice was simple: a slice of apple pie with ice cream, and once again Chris did all the work while he held her. Her own dessert took the longest to choose, as she couldn't decide which of the 3 toppings to choose for her ice cream, and Kevin earned himself a lifelong friend by suggesting she get a little of all 3. The ride back home continued to be as enjoyable as dinner. Kevin walked them to Caroline's apartment door, but any thoughts of a quick hug or goodbye kiss were dashed when Chris took her mom's hand and pulled her inside, demanding a bath and reading a book before bed. It was just after noon on Sunday when Caroline stopped by Kevin's house to drop him off after church and brunch at IHOP. Chris was busy talking to Kevin about animals, and he didn't notice what was at his door. People stood until Caroline said, "It seems that someone is waiting for you at the door." Kevin looked around and said, "These are my ex-father-in-law and mother-in-law. I wonder what they want. I think I should go and find out." Chris quickly regained his attention by saying, "Don't forget to take me to the zoo." She looked worried that unexpected guests might interfere with their plans for the day. "I won't forget, Chris. You and Mom will come get me after you change, and I'll take you to the zoo. I promise." He smiled at the girl and her mother before getting out of the car. He stood and waved until they drove away, then turned to his guests and said, "What brings you here on such a beautiful Sunday afternoon?" Carrie's mother, Nancy, was the first to speak. "We need to talk to you. It's very important." It was obvious from her expression that she was upset. "Of course, I'll be out about 2 o'clock, but in the meantime, we can have coffee and talk." They walked in and sat down in the kitchen while Kevin began to make coffee and Nancy began to speak. "Carrie is very bad, Kevin. Ever since you visited her, she had to take sedatives all the time. As soon as the effect of the drugs wears off and she comes to her senses, she becomes hysterical." "What caused this, and what does it have to do with me?" "Well, when we asked you to meet with us on Friday, we wanted you to meet with her neurologist first. We wanted him to explain her condition to you." "Sorry, I didn't know. What would be the difference? I barely told her anything." Nancy began to cry and her husband took her hand before she continued. "The problem is that you told her about the affair and the divorce. We wanted to avoid that until she was a little stronger." Kevin was puzzled and quickly asked, "Why don't I mention her affair and divorce? Did she really expect me to forget all about it now that Trey is dead? She can't just have me back by default just because there's more of him." "No." Joseph continued the conversation. "Carrie had severe brain damage and almost died. There was physical damage to part of the temporal lobe, and it is possible that other areas were also affected by swelling. Her doctor explained to us that she has retrograde amnesia." "Amnesia? How is that possible? She recognized me right away. I'm guessing she'll recognize you too." "It's not a problem of losing all her memory. The problem is that she has lost almost everything from the last year and a half, as well as scattered memories from earlier. When she regained consciousness, the doctors ran a lot of tests, and she has large gaps in her memories of the recent past. She thinks you just returned from Cancun." Joseph paused to take a sip of his coffee. "They think she might eventually remember a lot of the lost memories, but they don't know when or how much she'll remember. It's like the movie The Bourne Identity." "So you're saying she doesn't remember the divorce or even the affair? I suppose I could lie to her, but in the end, I'd still have to tell her the truth. Like I said, she doesn't get a free pass just because Trey is dead." Joseph was determined to continue and said, "We must not tell her lies. If we do, she may create false memories." The doctor explained that we must tell her the truth so that the remaining memories can be restored. Her mind will fill in the gaps where there are not enough memories, and if we tell her something completely wrong, her mind may mistake it for a false recovered memory. Kevin was puzzled and said, "Then we're back to square one again. You're saying I should have told her about the affair and the divorce?" "Not really. The doctor suggested not to lie in these situations. You just need to skirt the truth. He wanted us to start giving her little pieces of information so she could put the puzzle together correctly. You overloaded her with information. The doctor thinks that some of this may have caused memories of an affair and a divorce, but we don't yet know how much of it she remembered." Nancy Kane calmed down and said, "She's very weak emotionally too. The news you told her really upset her. They're going to start giving her another medicine, and they hope that we can start talking to her about things again very soon." The conversation started to make Kevin feel a little guilty about what he said. "I'm sorry if I made the situation worse. I didn't know what condition she was in." "It's okay, Kevin. We hope that you can help us bring back some of her lost memories. We would like to take all the photo albums from you, as the doctors say that photographs can bring back memories that will help her regain the lost ones. That's it. Anything you have that can help her remember will also be helpful." The mention of photo albums made Kevin stand up and walk over to the kitchen window, where he stood looking out. "I can't help you with the albums. They're gone." Nancy looked puzzled and said, "What do you mean they're gone?" "I mean, they're gone. They came out with my trash months ago." He turned and began to walk down the corridor, saying, "I can explain this if I type a letter for you." He left for a few minutes, during which Carrie's parents consoled each other. When he returned, he had a printout in his hands, which he showed to the elderly couple. "Many months ago, I deleted all the photos from our albums that I wanted to keep. A few days after that, I sent the following message to Carrie's work address. I took all the photos I wanted from our albums. Anything left is here in a box for you to do the same. Let me know if you want me to send it there or to the condo." That's the answer I got from her. "Do whatever you want with them. I don't care." I kept them for a few weeks after that, but eventually decided that if she didn't want them, and neither did I, then I might as well throw them out with the trash. That's what I did. I'm sorry. Joseph and Nancy's faces showed shock and horror. They had nothing to say, and after thinking about the situation, Kevin added, "There are a few more things I can tell you other than this message. I'll go get them. This will take about 15 minutes, so pour yourself some more coffee." Kevin returned to the computer room, and exactly 15 minutes passed before he returned. He had a stack of papers and a box of CDs in his hands as he sat back down at the kitchen table. I printed out the entire group of letters through which I learned about the novel. Perhaps if Carrie reads them, they will help her remember this. He placed the stack in front of Nancy, who reached over to pick them up and begin reading. Kevin immediately took them from her hands and said, "There are some very explicit passages in some of these letters. I'm not sure you should read them because I know the impact they had on me, but if you decide to read them, consider this." He added copies of all the legal letters that had been sent to him, including the warning letter following his visit to the Crosby and Knox office. The last item was a CD on which he tagged Cancun. He handed it to them and said, "Those photos were on the computer, and that's all I have left of our time together. I also have to warn you about these photos. Carrie and I visited a nude beach while we were there, and all of these photos were taken there. However, there is one photo in which we are dressed and sitting on sun loungers on the beach. Carrie should probably watch the rest herself." Carrie's mother folded the papers and CD in front of her. Kevin thought that was an awfully small pile to sum up their marriage. He hoped this would help Carrie. They sat in silence for a few seconds before Nancy said, "I don't think you'll want to come and see Carrie. Come and talk to her about everything that happened between you." Kevin thought for just a moment before answering, "I don't think so, at least not right now. If she wants to talk to me after she reads all of this and realizes what she did to our marriage, call me and I might think about it." "I suppose it's impossible that you could consider starting over with her," her father said with a hopeful look on his face. "I can't do this, I'm afraid. I've spent all these months trying to get rid of my feelings for her, and I can't risk her doing this to me again. She chose Trey's wealth and social status over me, and I will never give her the chance to do that to me a second time. It was in her nature that she could do that, and I don't believe that a blow to the head would change that aspect of her personality. Even if I could believe in such a possibility, I simply won't take the risk." Joseph and Nancy agreed that they understood his feelings on the matter. They thanked him for the offer to talk to Carrie later if she wanted. The three of them were walking out the front door, exchanging goodbyes as Caroline and her daughter approached the porch. Chrissy immediately told the older couple, "We're going to the zoo. We will see elephants." The Canes quickly greeted mother and daughter and soon left. Apologizing for not being ready, Kevin invited Caroline and Chrissy to come in and wait while he changed. It was ready in just a couple of minutes, and soon the happy trio went to the zoo. Another month passed, and Kevin was happier than ever. He dated Caroline and Chrissy at least once a week, and although his relationship with Caroline progressed to some pretty heated kissing on her couch, they never found a way to make their relationship sexual. Chrissy got in their way more than once, although not intentionally. Not being able to sleep when he was in the apartment was starting to irritate Kevin. This must have irritated Caroline too, as she offered to find a babysitter for their next date. The day had arrived and Kevin was looking forward to it. They planned to go to a movie and stop at a popular bar to dance a little, and Caroline's mother agreed to come look after Chrissy. It was a happy couple who left Caroline's apartment that evening. For the first time, they were able to be alone together. The movie and dance went very well, and at midnight Kevin suggested they stop at his house for a cup of coffee since they were nearby. Caroline agreed, smiling, but warned that she could not expect her mother to stay very long. When they entered the house, Kevin said, "If you prefer wine instead of coffee, I have a few bottles in the basement. When Caroline agreed that it sounded like a good idea, he quickly pulled out a bottle for them. They had been sipping wine and dancing to his large collection of CDs for about half an hour when Kevin led her back to the living room couch. After a couple of very pleasant kisses, he pulled away from her embrace and took his cell phone. "What are you doing?" Caroline asked with a smile on her face. I was starting to like it. Kevin put his finger to her lips and said, "Just give me a minute. I want to talk to your nanny." Caroline was shocked and tried to grab the phone, saying, "Don't bother my mother. Why are you calling her?" She alternated between confusion and laughter as she tried and failed to reach his cell phone. The call was answered quickly, and Caroline stopped struggling for the phone when she heard Kevin say, "This is Kevin. It's okay, but I wanted to ask you something, Mrs. Smithers." "Okay, then, Marion. I wanted to ask if you wanted to go home. I was hoping that maybe Caroline could stay longer." "I see. Okay, that sounds great." There was a much longer silence, almost a full minute, before Kevin said, "I really like the way you think, Marion. Yes, I'll tell her exactly what you told me. She won't need to change the sheets. I'll do it myself." There was an even shorter pause before Kevin continued. "See you then. I already said how much I like it. What do you think? Goodbye, Marion." Kevin laughed as he ended the call, and Caroline looked at him in confusion. "What was that, Kevin?" Kevin had another good laugh before he said, "I'll tell you exactly what we talked about. I think I'll really like your mom. It's not that I didn't like her before. She and I always got along great when you and I were dating in high school." He stopped and chuckled again. "So tell me, Kevin, what did she say?" Caroline was puzzled and clearly did not understand what kind of call this was. "Well, your stepdad, Gary, joined her at your apartment. Chrissy is fine and Repko is sleeping, and your mother and Gary are doing about the same thing there that we did on the couch. She told me that he had a doctor's appointment today and came to tell her that he now has a prescription for the little blue pills." Kevin laughed again before continuing. "Your mother insists that you stay here tonight because they will sleep in your bed." "Well, that's not exactly how she put it. She told me they didn't want to. They have pajamas, so they will have to sleep naked in your bed." Carol had a look of absolute shock on her face as she said, "My mother would never say anything like that. What are you trying to force on me?" Kevin laughed again before saying, "I forgot to mention, they were enjoying that bottle of wine you had in the cupboard, and I think Gary got your mom a little drunk. She said she thought we were good together. And you need to forget about Frank. She wants you to stay here with me." He paused and, smiling, leaned down to kiss Carol. Her face was very red, and when she broke the kiss, she said, "I can't believe she said that, my own mother." She looked into Kevin's eyes, trying to answer the question with what she saw there, before closing her eyes and moving forward to begin a very sensual kiss with him. Then they had sex. They lay there for over a minute before Kevin said, "Carol, we should have done this in high school. I would never let you leave me if we did. It was amazing, even if it ended too quickly. Give me a few minutes, and we can try again with much more attention to detail." Caroline giggled before saying, "Just a few minutes. We don't need to rush, now that you've made an agreement with my mother. I still can't believe she told you all this, even though I told her how much I enjoyed spending time with you. I didn't think I'd ever be able to trust a man again after Frank died." She was silent for a moment before continuing softly, "You know, that was the first time I thought about him." Kevin opened his eyes when she spoke and became thoughtful after her confession. "I thought about Carrie for a moment when I turned on the light. After that, I only thought about you until you said that." He smiled at Caroline, who looked at him as he spoke. "I need to thank you for freeing me from this ghost." He leaned down and began to kiss her, the kiss becoming deeper and more intense every second. They made love again. Kevin lay in his living room at 2 p.m. the next day, remembering the wonderful evening and morning spent with Caroline. They made love twice last night and again before they got up to shower together. Waking up with Caroline in his arms was a dream come true for him, and he thought she felt the same since she seemed so happy when they woke up together. They got along really well sexually, and he was already looking forward to the next night they could spend together. Considering how cooperative her mother was, Kevin really hoped it would be soon. He couldn't help but laugh as he remembered their meeting at IHOP that morning. Marion and Gary, along with Chrissy, were sitting and waiting for them when they arrived. The two adults smiled at them as they walked in, while Chrissy laughed and waved, happily greeting her mother. When they sat down at the table, Kevin said, "Sorry I'm late. I needed to do some laundry." He laughed as Caroline blushed and lightly punched his arm. As they ate, they joked constantly about blue pills, sheets, and wine, bantering back and forth between the two couples. Chrissy looked at one of them several times with a question in her eyes, and it seemed that the adults confused her. Later, as they said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, Kevin kissed Caroline and Chrissy and then hugged Marion tightly. As he hugged her, he whispered in her ear, "Thank you so much for your suggestions last night. This was the push we needed." Marion smiled at him, then hugged him tightly again, only to whisper back, "I think you two are well suited for each other. You're exactly what she's needed for a long time, and Gary and I made good use of the opportunity to test his recipe." She laughed, turning and taking her husband's arm to walk to Caroline's car. Kevin stood in the parking lot and waved after them, smiling. He was once again lost in the memories of the shower he and Caroline had enjoyed together when his cell phone rang and forced him to get up from the couch. He assumed it was Caroline and responded with a cheerful, "Hello, Kevin." Kevin recognized Joseph Kane's voice and replied, "Yes, it's me. How can I help you, Joseph?" "Well, Kevin, I'm calling about your offer to talk to Carrie once we've looked at all the information you've given us. She lives at our house now, and she asked us to invite you over for coffee so she could talk to you. She didn't want to call herself because I think she's afraid you'll hang up." Kevin was very surprised by Joseph's call and hesitated for a moment before answering, "I think I can. I have no plans for this day. Do you want me to come right now? If you could, we'd be grateful." "Okay, I will come." Kevin was a little worried as he left his house, wondering what exactly Carrie wanted to tell him. When he entered the house of his former in-laws, he was immediately reminded of all the previous times he had been there. They were all occasions when he would gladly walk through that door, but this was not one of those occasions. Carrie was not there when he arrived, and Joseph and Nancy asked him to join them in the kitchen. After they had poured 4 cups of coffee, Joseph said, "Nancy and I will let you and Carrie talk alone here while we go into the living room." They took their 2 cups and left, and just a few seconds later Carrie walked into the kitchen and sat down opposite Kevin. Kevin was amazed at how good she looked. Her hair had grown long enough to be styled a bit, and her complexion was good. It was clear that she had lost weight compared to the last time he had seen her, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She looked nervous, and he wondered what she would say to him, nervously twirling the handkerchief in his hands. He finally decided to break the silence, saying, "You look like you're recovering well, Carrie." "Thank you, Kevin. I'm grateful that you came to talk to me so quickly. I hope this was not a problem for you, because it could wait for a more convenient time." Her voice was softer than he remembered, and she continued to twirl the handkerchief in her hands, periodically dabbing her eyes with it. It seemed to him that she was about to cry as her eyes filled with tears. "It's not a problem, Carrie. How's your memory? Are you starting to remember everything?" She shook her head and said, "I only remembered a few things in the past year and a half. I was at Crosby and Knox, and the receptionist was kind enough to show me around and tell me a lot about my time there. A few things seemed familiar, and I was able to understand some other things after talking to her. I found out that she and I were actually pretty good friends while I was working there, but I don't have any memories of her from that time. It was really very frustrating." "I can imagine. Are there things you want to talk about that you think I can help you remember?" Kevin found it easier to talk to her than he expected. Carrie smiled and said, "Yes, I have a few questions. I talked to Susan a lot, and she really helped me understand some of the things I did." She was still nervously twirling her handkerchief and periodically dabbing her eyes. Kevin took another sip of coffee and said, Don't be afraid to ask me any questions. I will try to be as honest with you as possible. Before I ask you anything, I just want to say how sincerely I apologize for the way I treated you back then. If I hadn't seen copies of the emails and talked to others, I would never have believed I could have done this. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, and she had to continually pat her eyes dry. Kevin didn't really know how to respond to that. There was no way to say, it's okay, given what he had to go through because of her cheating and its consequences. Carrie broke the silence, continuing, I only remember vague snippets about Bradley and nothing about our time together. All I know about this is second-hand information. She was silent for almost a minute before continuing. I've seen pictures of him and heard descriptions of him from people at the firm. He wasn't particularly liked there, and I don't understand what I could see in him. I even visited his apartment, and if my things weren't there, I would never have believed that I lived there with him. The tears flowed faster, and she had to constantly blot her eyes. Kevin continued to sit silently, waiting for Carrie to ask her questions. Again, after a long pause, she continued. There was one question that none of the others could fully answer. I wanted to know how you found out about what I was doing. I know it was related to emails, but I don't know how. Kevin explained how he discovered the first letter and how it led him to others. While he spoke, she opened a drawer and took out a tattered and stained stack of papers, the very letters he had given to her parents. He explained to her how the mention of the lingerie set had initially caught his attention, and then told her what she had told him about purchasing the set. He continued by telling the story of what she told him about the purse and earrings. She looked terrible listening to him recount some of her lies. When he finished, it took her a while to recover and wipe away her tears. When she was finally able to speak, she said, Forgive me for lying. I know this is easy for me to say, but I truly and sincerely apologize. After a few moments, she asked, While we're talking about letters, can you tell me about this one where Bradley and I joked about my driver? You'll probably regret asking. When you joked about the driver bringing you to him, you were talking about me. Every time you went to the state capitol, I drove you to the airport and carried your suitcases to the check-in counter. I took you to him and even carried your bag with expensive lingerie that you were going to wear for him. You too thought it was funny. Even the thought of it started to make him angry again, so he continued, That's not the only thing you joked about. There were also comments about how you should have made me call you at your hotel room early in the evening. He went on to explain how he always called around 9:45 p.m. and how he was able to prove that she was not in the room before or after his calls. It was easy to see that he was still angry about this. She started crying again, but after a couple of minutes, she was able to say, I'm so sorry, Kevin. I just can't understand how I could do this. Kevin took a long sip of his coffee before continuing, It's in the past now, Carrie. I still get upset when I think about some things, but I've had enough time to get over it. The conversation moved away from the topic of emails and onto her health. She explained to Kevin that she sometimes has seizures and doctors try different medications to control them. She was not emotionally ready to work and had already completely quit Crosby and Knox. Her parents had consulted with a lawyer, and she expected them to file a lawsuit against Bradley's insurance company and his estate for the injuries she suffered in the accident. After about 15 minutes of this, Kevin announced that it was time for him to leave. Before you go, Kevin, I wanted to ask if you thought it was possible for us to go on a date. I know you'll probably never forgive the new Carrie, the one who betrayed you so badly, but I'm the old Carrie again. I don't remember cheating on you or almost anything from that time. Maybe if we go out for dinner or other dates, you'll fall in love with old Carrie again someday. She said all this quickly so that she could do it before he could stop her. This was a situation Kevin had been dreading, and he paused, thinking about what to say, before responding, Sorry, Carrie. For me, there is no old or new Carrie. There is only one Carrie, the one I fell in love with and then lost to try. It took me a long time to get over it, but I'm happy where I am now. I know this is not what you want to hear, and I understand that. She began to cry quietly again as he spoke. As he stood up to leave, she asked, "Have you found someone else?" He slowed down again, unsure of how her words might affect her. "I think so, Carrie. I think yes. Is that the dark-haired woman with the little girl?" There was a look of surprise on Kevin's face as he said, "Yes, she is." "How do you know?" "My parents saw her when they were at your house. They told me about her." Carrie continued to wipe away tears as she spoke. Finally, she said, "You deserve someone who will treat you better than me." After finishing speaking, she ran out of the room. Kevin left the house himself and left long before Carrie's parents realized that Kevin and Carrie were no longer in the kitchen. A month later, on a sunny Saturday in April, Gary and Kevin rented a truck to move Caroline and Chrissy from their apartment to Kevin's house. Everything was going so well between them that they decided to see if they were right for each other. Chrissy was thrilled to have a yard to play in and a big room of her own. Kevin's computer had been moved to the corner of the living room, and the room it was in was now freshly painted and decorated for a little girl. There was a large box with a children's play area and swings sitting in the garage, ready to be assembled. The three became regulars at their church every Sunday, and Kevin soon noticed that Carrie's parents sometimes attended the same church. He thought nothing of it when, 4 months after Caroline moved in with him, the pastor announced that they would be married the following week and that any of the parishioners could attend. They decided they wanted a small, informal wedding and chose their church instead of City Hall for the ceremony. Chrissy was thrilled to be the flower girl. At her mother's wedding, her only friend, and that she will soon have a new dad. Kevin quickly made it clear that Frank Jansen would always be her father, but that he would be happy to be her dad. He and Caroline agreed that Chrissy would keep her father's last name, even if they went ahead with the legal adoption. Kevin insisted that Frank's sacrifice would not result in him losing his only child, and Kevin and Caroline spent an hour on the phone with Frank's parents, explaining their upcoming marriage and their plans to keep Chrissy connected to the Jansen family. The conversation ended with a promise to visit Chrissy's paternal grandparents for a week before the end of the summer. Kevin was excited to meet them, and they decided the trip would be their honeymoon. Their simple wedding ceremony went off without a hitch, with many friends and family in attendance. It was obvious to some that Caroline was pregnant, and Chrissy made sure everyone in the church knew that she was going to have two twin brothers. It was hard to tell if she was more excited about the upcoming arrival of her brothers or the fact that Kevin was now her dad. A week later, while Kevin was at the auto repair shop changing the exhaust system before their trip to the Jansen family, he met his former brother-in-law, Robert Kane. Robert said he and Susan accompanied Carrie to her wedding last week. They only stayed until the end of the service, as Carrie found it much more difficult to be there than she expected. Kevin, in turn, had a hard time understanding why Carrie came to his wedding. Why did she want to be there? I know how upset she was when I said I was involved with Caroline. Watching our wedding must have been even harder for her. Robert replied, "She is trying to outlive you as you outlived her. She thought that watching your wedding would make it easier for her to move on. It really upset her, but she said she was glad she came." The men continued their small talk until Robert said, "I almost forgot to tell you. Carrie's lawsuit against Bradley Knox's insurance company was settled. Since it looked like she would never be able to work again, she received almost $2 million. Part of the deal was that she got his apartment and now lives there. We couldn't understand why she wanted it, but she said she hoped living there would help her regain her lost memories. Personally, I don't think this is very likely. Doctors believe that she has recovered everything she could. I'm afraid that constant reminders of that creep won't be good for her mental state. With his death, your second marriage, and the fact that she only remembers the good times with you, I think this is a mistake." 2 years have passed quickly for Kevin and Caroline. Their two sons, Frank and Kevin Jr., were complemented by a younger sister for Chrissy. They named their daughter Mariana after her grandmother. The house was beginning to look too small for their growing family, and they were already discussing whether they should add an addition to the house or buy a larger one. They haven't made a decision yet, believing they have another year before they have to decide. It was a quiet Friday evening when the phone rang and Caroline answered. After a moment, she called Kevin on the phone. When he picked up the phone, he was surprised to hear Joseph Kane's voice. "I should have called you, Kevin, so you wouldn't find out about this in the newspaper tomorrow. Carrie is dead. Robert found her when he came to visit today. Looks like she died yesterday." The news stunned Kevin, and he lost control for a moment. His reaction was strong enough for Caroline to realize that something was wrong, and she walked towards him, taking his hand. Her calming touch and worried look brought him back to reality, happily at home with Caroline and their children. Her short reaction was caused by a sudden memory of long-forgotten moments with Carrie, memories that he knew would never completely fade. He smiled briefly at Caroline before saying, "I'm really sorry to hear that, Joseph. Please accept my sincere condolences to you, Nancy and Robert." "Do you know what happened?" Joseph paused before answering. "I'm afraid she committed suicide. With pills. She left a note for me and Nancy, but it's mostly personal. She wanted us to let you know that she never stopped loving you. It looks like she tried, but it turned out to be impossible to forget her memories of you. She also wanted you to know that this isn't just because of you. She had ongoing health problems, both physical and mental, and these also played a role. I didn't know she had so many problems. I haven't spoken to her since I was at your house to see her. I'm very sorry this happened. If there is anything I can do for you or Nancy, please let me know." They exchanged a few more formal words before the conversation ended. A few days later, Kevin and Caroline attended Carrie's memorial service, where they were able to express their condolences to her family. Of the Crosby and Knox employees, only her friend Anne, the secretary, came. A few months later, Kevin learned that he was the heir to $500,000 from Carrie's estate. Most of her property went to her parents and brother. Kevin and Caroline had a long discussion about whether they should keep it, as Kevin was worried that it would be a constant reminder of Carrie in their lives. Ultimately, they decided to keep the money and create 4 trust funds for their children's education. The remainder was used to purchase a new and larger house. They often remembered Carrie and her generosity, but this did not cause them problems.